hey, let's start with the Green Knight. Let me know if anybody has seen it, anybody in the chat. For those of you that haven't, it's a 2021 medieval fantasy film, which was directed, written, and edited, and produced, actually, by David Lowery, who's a mostly festival director, from what I have learned. His original work, Ain't Them Bodies Saints, which was made in 2013, was his original work, was starring Rooney Mara and Casey Affleck, and it was nominated for the Grand Jury Prize at the 2013 Sundance Film Festival. So, yeah, he likes the kind of new wave, more modern kind of filmmaking. But before we go into the movie, we must, well, I think we should, rather, discuss what it's based on, because it's not an original story just that David Lowery came up with. It's actually an adaptation of a 14th century poem, which is called Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Very interesting subject. And I didn't do this research prior to the film, but I kind of guessed at it from, how the film started and everything like that. But I would like to quickly go over the historic background before we go into the review, just, so we have some kind of idea of where to place it in our heads. I'm going to Kyrgyzstan. Holy shit, you're going to Kyrgyzstan? Wow, you really do like these eastern countries, don't you? Well, best of luck with that, and I hope that you will still be able to join us for these streams from Kyrgyzstan. We've talked about it before, I remember. But anyway, so Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. As I said, it's a late 14th century chivalric romance, which was written in Middle English, which is just, the English. It's not Old English, it's not Modern English, it's Middle English, as in it's just the progression of the historic English, essentially. That's what it is. That's what Middle English is. The author of the work is unknown, and the title was given to it centuries later. It is one of the best-known Arthurian stories, as in, Arthur of Camelot, with its plot combining two types of folk motifs. The beheading game, which I'll talk about as we go into the movie, and the exchange of winnings. It is written in stanzas of alliterative verse, which is just the poetry style, each of which, and blah blah blah, that doesn't really matter, draws on Welsh, Irish, and English stories, as well as the French chivalric tradition, an important example of chivalric romance, which typically involves a hero who goes on a quest which tests his prowess. Which, the reason why I'm reading this is because it's important to how the story is based. It is essentially about a story about a knight that goes on a quest, but looked at from more of a different lens, perhaps more of a modern perspective in some way, but we're going to talk about that later. What the original story is about is about Sir Gawain, who is a knight of King Arthur's Round Table, who accepts a challenge from a mysterious Green Knight who dares any knight to strike him with his axe if he will take a return blow in a year and a day. Gawain accepts, and he accepts this challenge and beheads him, at which the Green Knight stands after he is beheaded, picks up his head, and reminds Gawain of the appointed time. In his struggles to keep his bargain, Gawain demonstrates chivalry and loyalty until his honor is called into question by a test involving the lord and lady in the castle at which he is a guest towards the end of his quest after a year. The poem survives in one manuscript, doesn't really matter. But yeah, that is essentially what the story is about. It's about this beheading game, about Sir Gawain that you can see on the screen right now, that accepts this challenge, and is essentially, his fate is essentially bound to this game, to this very, very interesting game. I'm gonna be your first Kyrgyz viewer. You definitely would. And that would be amazing. But anyway, yeah, so the film stars Dev Patel. This is the actor that is portraying Gawain, who is a nephew of King Arthur, who sets out on a journey to test his courage and face the Green Knight. It also stars Alicia Vikander, Joel Edgerton, Sarita Choudhury, Sean Harris, and Ralph Ineson. It was theatrically released in the United States on July 30th in 2021, and the film received acclaim from critics for its cinematography, music, acting, production values, and low-risk originality in direction and writing. So yeah, that is a little bit of an intro. It is a medieval fantasy, and it is somewhat of a modern take on a very, very old story from the late 14th century, which the movie kind of reminds us straight at the beginning. Not the very, very beginning. The very beginning is actually somewhat like Lord of the Rings reminiscent whispering, as in like, I'll tell you the story, but like in whisper and a woman whispering it to you, which then kind of like shifts in voice and it just sounds a little bit like a witch. And there's like an opening on this great hall, and it's you know, like it immediately kind of puts you into the proper setting. You're immediately in a medieval time and in a fairy tale-y but kind of dark fairy tale-y tone, which is something that I like when a movie is able to set itself and its themes and its motifs properly within the first couple of minutes. That is why I always focus on the intro. That is why I always open these reviews with my review of the intro. So yeah, immediately there was this whispering. So, you know, fairy tale, it shifted into this witch's voice. So you would think about witchcraft fantasy and also kind of like a dark motif on the whole fairy tale stuff, or a tale stuff, an ancient medieval tale stuff. You would see the great hall, and then the kind of more medievally music starts playing. The strings and the drums, the very simple strings and drums, hurdy-gurdy kind of style of music, works like throughout the film, but you know, is introduced immediately, which immediately drags you and keeps you in the atmosphere of this medieval fantasy, which works very well indeed. Music production in general is very, very good, and I noticed that straight from the beginning, when, you know, there was this long shot at the opening of the film after this great hall and like, I'll tell you a story, blah blah blah, which is the kind of narration that I'm able to forgive, because it is like a fairy tale-y, whispery narration that also not only gives exposition of some kind, but rather builds atmosphere, because the exposition that this narration gave was very minimal. Either way, though, there was this shot on like a hut and a bunch of goats and geese on the ground. Everything looked very medieval, very kind of dirty, and the camera panned out into this windowsill, and this, you know, not windowsill, but like a window frame of stone, as you would think of windows from the early Gothic era. And there was like droplets dropping down onto the windowsill, and as there was like the drop made a beat, essentially a certain beat, and the music started playing within that beat, and it was like a cool medieval beat which worked with these droplets of water. And I immediately knew that, like, you know, this film, you know, has like some idea of like basing and some idea of furthering atmosphere through the proper use of music. You know, nothing crazy, nothing like the massive orchestras of Lord of the Rings or anything like that, which I love, but it would kind of position the film like rather differently. This is meant to be like a dark fairy tale, essentially, rather than an epic quest. And that, I think, is one of the most important points about this movie in general. It's not actually a movie about an epic quest and a chivalrous knight. It's more of like taking that story and putting that into more of a darker theme. It more explores the like cowardice, lack of self-confidence, and the necessity to prove himself of this knight without actually fully being confident in all of these characteristics that knights should have. You know, so like Honor, for example, he's shown as he's being like, he wakes up, and our introduction to this character is that he wakes up in a brothel, stinking of wine, and he rushes to the castle to meet with his uncle the king, There's, you know, he knows all of the prostitutes by name, and he just rushes out of the brothel as like, you know, a little bit of a party guy, I guess, a medieval kind of party guy. Rushes out. So, you know, immediately you have this kind of like challenging of these old ideas of honor, or what have you. He is trying to be chivalrous throughout the movie, but he struggles to, you know, kind of back it up with self-confidence. So when there's like women making a move on him or anything like that, he kind of like tenses up. He doesn't know what to do. That's kind of what I'm talking about. I don't want to get ahead of myself or talk too much about the story itself from the beginning, but like I'm just trying to illustrate that he does have these characteristics, but as his characters are built, as his character is built throughout the movie, it is very clearly shown that he's not kind of steady in these particular characteristics, you know. Right, I can't believe how effective green tea is on me. Genuinely, today at 5, I was still doing some work for my agency, and I had meetings with people, and I had to brainstorm. And after these meetings, I felt completely deflated. I was like, I mean, I was happy with the work that I've done, but I was like, I just can't. I can't stream like this. Like, I knew that I was going to stream. I didn't think about canceling or anything like that, because I wouldn't do that to you guys. But I felt like how am I going to hold a full-on like discussion debate whilst just being so tired, you know, not really being able to focus on anything. But I've just drunk a couple sips of this green tea, which I'm keeping the tea bag in because it increases the intensity. And more that I drink it, the more I feel like, you know, I'm actually focused full on. Like, I do actually have diagnosed ADD, and green tea genuinely is the only thing that helps me. Not even coffee. I've been trying coffee, and it does wake me up. It does like give me energy, but it doesn't focus my mind. Coke doesn't focus my, as in Coca-Cola. I didn't mean the alternative. I didn't try that. If you were asking, which I'm sure you weren't. Anyway. Nothing focuses my mind like green tea. I never tried Ritalin or Adderall or anything like that because I feel like if it just so happens that it does give me a massive boost, I don't want to become dependent on it. So green tea for me, and I must say that it works. But I'm sorry for that for a little bit of a tangent there. I just don't want this to be just me fully, you know, just throwing facts at you or my ideas. I want this to be a little chill, you know. I want you guys to kind of get into this discussion, the debate, a little bit about the movie, even if you haven't seen it, you know, all questions and anything like that. Please let me know. I'm always curious. But yeah, one thing that I have to say is I just have this like absolute love and almost obsession. I wouldn't call it obsession because I can do without it, but I'm just completely in love with anything just medieval or ancient. You know, I love medieval and ancient movies. I just love the vibe. I love reading historical novels. One of my favorite authors is Bernard Cornwell, who writes historical novels from the 9th and 10th century Britain. I've read like 20 books from that period alone. And I'm just like so into medieval stuff, so I was straight away like really hooked, and I didn't mind the fantasy. Like, fantasy isn't really the genre that I go for, but I didn't mind it, and in medieval style I like it as well. Medieval style fantasy, I like, you know, as you can probably tell by me liking The Witcher and Skyrim. That is pretty much medieval fantasy when you think about it. But one thing that straight away kind of distracted me, and I don't want to say disturbed me, that sounds like, you know, that sounds too strong, you know. I didn't find it disturbing, but it just distracted me a little bit, and I was like a little confused by it, is by the setting of the movie, because I am a big, history buff when it comes to medieval times. I love just learning about the history and everything like that. And when you have a completely fantasy world, as you do have in like Skyrim, for example, or Lord of the Rings, then everything's kind of like, sure, like everything's down. It's just a completely made up world. But this movie took from like vast majority of like a lot of real history from multiple different areas and from multiple different eras, which I immediately was confused by and I really didn't like. The entire opening of the movie, the first like 30 minutes, takes place in the castle where Gawain is lives, and his nephew, which is by the way Arthur, supposed to, I mean not his nephew, his uncle, which is by the way Arthur, the old king, Arthur of Camelot. It all just had very strange combinations of stuff, So, like, first things first, there was, Gawain and his mother, who looked like Spanish royalty. With what they wore, because, they're very light. You can see it on this picture, kind of. These very light kind of shirt blouses or whatever. I'm not really huge on fashion, but like this is what Spanish royalty would wear. Combined with heavy set Central European to Western European early Gothic architecture, with like the castles and everything. No fancy buildings. Everything looks super Gothic. Combined with mountainous region, which confused my idea of geography completely. That combined with the fact that the guards of the castle have halberdiers, which and the kind of halberdiers that were used in like 16th, 17th century, more like 17th, 18th century actually, which doesn't correspond with the architecture almost at all. Very strange looking crowns that look like very like Renaissance to classicist, but of like some kind of southern nation. It look very strange. People were using and writing ancient Nordic runes, which preceded 9th century for sure, and this appeared to be almost like some parts of these of the things that I saw was like 17th and 18th century. Witchcraft was pretty commonplace. The king's sister was practicing witchcraft, whilst at the same time people were talking about Christmas, about Mass, about the birth of Christ, about communion wine, and all of that. At the same time, the king and his queen were wearing pendants with what appeared to be the Star of David, which is mostly a Jewish symbol that came into use a lot later than medieval times. And then, as to top it all off, the king, when addressing his people, called to them Saxon brethren. Saxons were people of England, and people of ancient England, not ancient England, but old England, from like the 4th to about 10th century or 11th century. Those were Saxons, basically the English from the 5th to the 10th century or 11th century. So that is also completely strange. Where I was thinking, like, is this like Wessex or Mercia or one of the old English kingdoms? So but that is probably just me. It's just this little pet peeve that I have. If you do use real history, jumbling it together in a very weird way kind of confuses people that like history, or this type of history. So yeah, maybe it is just my personal pet peeve. It didn't distract me too much throughout the entirety of the movie because it was mostly focused on the quest. But the beginning, it did kind of like affect the way I saw the movie. I didn't like the fact that it borrowed from his history in a very jumbled manner that had no structure to it. I didn't like that. Use history, that's great. I love when you use history, but use it consistently, please. Like real history. um, the movie was also kind of like unsure with the quest of the main character straight at the beginning. It felt to me, as at least, as the fact that like he was kind of like unsure about his quest. Gawain was, after beheading the knight and having to go to this quest. He was like, he spent the year presumably in a brothel drinking, and the movie hints at it. But it's still kind of shown that he's like unsure about the quest, which is fine, and I suppose true to the original concept as well. But it, like, especially this conversation that he had with the king, like on the eve before he was supposed to set off, like, there was this one conversation that irks me. Literally, it's just like one or two conversations that annoyed me, and this was one of them. And it was kind of launched by the quote from Gawain, "I fear I'm not meant for greatness." Like, I'm not the chosen one, essentially. And this is like such a old trope. Like, I understand it's an old story, but you can still kind of work around it, and the movie has shown that it can work around it very, very well, because it takes this heroic quest and puts it in a very different light and very different perspective, which I loved about the rest of the movie. But there at the beginning, it kind of stumbled in that sense, in that little conversation. It kind of like reverted. It kind of felt like not enough focus was put onto this conversation, as compared to the focus that was put on the rest of the quest, if you know what I mean. So that was just like a little thing that I wanted to point out. But as the quest started, Gawain, oh, by the way, spoiler alert, I didn't say this at the beginning. I usually do. I did put it in my tags, but obviously, spoiler alert, this is a comprehensive review, and I will talk about the movie from the beginning to the end. So if you wish it to see it for yourself, if you haven't seen it for yourself, perhaps go back to the stream or the video if this ends up on YouTube at a later date. Anyway, so as he sets off on his quest, Gawain is stopped by no more than three. I mean, I say no more very fancily, but it was literally three highwaymen who. Highwaymen is like a different word for robbers, essentially, on a path, like bandits that would attack you in Skyrim. So he was stopped by those, and very effectively just taken out of his saddle, and he immediately started begging for his life. After which he was bound and his stuff was broken and robbed. That immediately, this scene kind of showed, by his reaction to the robbery and everything like that, is that this movie is not going in the direction. And I mean, it was kind of clear from the beginning as well, like what kind of character he was. This movie isn't going with this cool character, this hero that goes on a quest. It is more of a human portrayal and the human struggles of a hero on such a quest, and his almost unhealthy obsession of having to go on a quest that he himself does not feel prepared for, which I love about the movie. Like this like central theme is, I think, a very, very good way of looking at the quests, of looking at the quests of the past, essentially, of these past fairy tales. And it was very well illustrated in this robbery. He was bound and put against a tree in the classic, medieval, let's bind someone and put them in a tree way, against the tree, as his stuff was robbed from his horse. But as one of the highwaymen discovered the axe that you can see on the image over there, he looked at the axe, and this was the axe of the Green Knight, the axe that was left for Gawain to take back to the Green Knight a year and a day in this white chapel where he was traveling to. I didn't specify this, I didn't clarify this, I didn't realize, sorry. So as I said, the beheading game essentially meant that he had to, after beheading this Green Knight, he had to go and seek him out. And in this place called the Green Chapel, which was apparently 6 knights north And that is the quest that he's on. You know, he's going to the Green Chapel to get beheaded, essentially, or fight the Green Knight. The movie isn't really super specific in that way, but it is assumed that he, goes to have the blow returned, as the game would suggest. But yeah, so as he is bound there, one of the highwaymen discovers the axe, and the axe has some kind of magical properties, and it makes him want to go on the quest themselves. So the highwayman gets up on the horse and leaves, and the other two highwaymen run after him. Upon which Gawain is left bound to the tree, and he kind of falls down. He lies down on the forest floor. And camera kind of like pans away, and you have this beautiful shot of a forest. I love medieval type films, and I love forest, shooting in a forest, as in a movie. I don't mean actually like, with guns. But I love forest. So there's this beautiful natural kind of European forest, and very, very beautifully shot. This movie is very good when it comes to like video production. It's truly beautiful. Either way, so it pans all around, does a 360 back towards Gawain, and Gawain is now a skeleton. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, holy shit, this movie is actually doing like just a madness. This movie, fully got us to connect with his main character. And 40 or 45 minutes in, it's a 2-hour movie, by the way, 45 minutes in, he's dead. And I'm like, holy shit, that's pretty incredible. And I paused the movie and I started writing a note like, wow, this is incredible. I have this bad habit when watching movies for reviews to like immediately as I have a strong thought to pause it and write it down. Then, so I wrote something like, this is a very interesting way of kind of subverting expectations, which works, and it's original because blah blah blah. And then I let it play, and it panned away, and it did another 360 all around, and it went back to Gawain, and Gawain was suddenly alive and just looking around him, scared. And I figured out that the movie baited me, but I also figured out that this whole scene was about very creatively showing like his fear at the moment. And that is, this particular scene is what really got me really interested into the movie, because I was like unsure with like how how they were kind of like how they were making the history kind of scuffed. The English that was spoken in the castle was also kind of weird. I kind of glossed past that, but like so the English was not like the kind of old-time English. Of course, we wouldn't understand that, but there is a way of making English sound old, that so that the English is spoken as it was in the Victorian times, for example. So old in that way, it kind of achieves a similar effect. If you've seen the movie The Witch, I mean it's The Witch, but it's written in a weird way. The Witch, essentially, if you've seen that movie, then they speak in that particular dialect, which is actually old Victorian North American actually dialect. And that immediately, the English kind of works very well. Or you can just forget about it, modern English pretty much, but just like, fancy turns of phrases, like more fancy turns of phrases, and get rid of like the more modernities essentially in the way we speak, like modern phrases, or the way we like structure sentences in more of a modern way. You can kind of do that as well. But the movie went in a way that I really didn't enjoy, especially in the long castle dialogues, where the English was pretty much modern. Like they were talking about, I want to build bridges with my nephew. That is kind of like a very modern kind of speech. But at the same time, they were saying thee, thy, and thou, as in the, thee, thy, and thou, the old ways of saying you and your. And that felt like pretty cheap. So I was already having my doubts, but after seeing the scene that I told you about with the skeleton, I was immediately back on board, because the way the movie kind of did that, and I realized like this is his fear. He's afraid that he will just stay here bound. There nobody will be here, and these were like very long pans. So it kind of signified the passage of time as well. but instead of like real passage of time, it signified the passage of time in his head. And we, like, with these like pans, like 360 that way, 360 that way, the movie was able to achieve in this very simple short shot, or more or less of a short shot, several things. First of all, the real threat of the situation in which Gawain found himself. Second of all, his fear of the situation, the fact that he was afraid. Third of all, it built his character in a way that we saw that, you know, he's more viable to panic, or more akin, or more likely to panic in situations where like knights that we would imagine to be on such a quest would not panic, perhaps. After which, you know, he hopped over, like he did like barrel rolls towards the sword, towards his sword that was abandoned onto the ground, on the ground, luckily, and he just cut himself off. You know, and you know the quest continued. But I wanted to point out that this is the scene where I really gained a lot of respect for the movie, and that really wanted, that really made me really interested in the quest, as it were. Then there was like another chapter, and by the way, the movie was to an extent kind of separated into chapters. It didn't really work, or it wasn't really said that way in the latter half of the movie, but in the first half, every like 15 minutes or so, there would be like a medieval text that would say, you know, this is the chapter of like this and this, you know. So then there was the chapter of the meeting of Saint Winifred, who was a woman that apparently lived in this house in the woods where Gawain stumbled after, you know, he recovered from the robbery. And as he did, he didn't found anyone. The hut was abandoned, so he went to sleep, and then he was awoken by this woman. And she was like, "What are you doing in my bed, dude?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," you know. And he really was like chivalrous, you know, like, I shall bid you apologies and blah 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 and go away. But she's like, no, you need to help me. I lost something. And he's like, okay, sure. And as she was like approaching him, she was floating above like the floorboards as a ghost. So he was like immediately freaked out. You know, and as she was kind of like approaching him, non-threateningly, but like approaching him in a very weird floaty way, he kind of went to touch her, and she was like, "Don't touch me! What are you doing?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Essentially, he didn't say it that way. You know, it wasn't that much of a modern speak. He didn't say like, "Sorry, dude." But I like this particular moment because the movie still like kind of has this lightheartedness in certain situations such as this, because he was trying to touch her to see if she was a ghost, you know, because like he was freaked out, and I really like that, because I feel like that's something that I might try if I were in a similar situation. It's hard to imagine, but if I saw a random like ghostly looking pale woman, which kind of looked real but then started floating over the floorboards towards me, I'd be like, what the fuck is happening? And would try to touch it, because I would think like maybe it's a ghost and my arm would go through her or something. So I like that little moment there. It kind of like, I don't think it speaks too much about the movie, so I wasn't sure whether to mention it. I'm just saying that, you know, that's a little thing that I enjoyed, you know. It is a little thing that I enjoyed. Anyway, Saint Winifred was also important because it kind of introduced us to, or the meeting of Saint Winifred, I'm talking about the chapter. It was important because it introduced us to more of a mystical part of this whole quest. There was witchcraft straight from the beginning. The mother of Gawain was a witch, and we saw her do some witchcraft that essentially possibly summoned the Green Knight. But here, what Winifred apparently lost, and what she asked Gawain to get her, was her head, which was at the bottom of a pond. As you can see, there's Gawain grabbing the head of Saint Winifred, going into the pond for it. And immediately as he goes into the pond, he like everything kind of like shifts, and the water is suddenly like blood red, and there's like him in the middle, and there's this massive, you know, ocean of where he is, and there's like stars all around him, and he's just kind of like falling. Very trippy, kind of scene. And at that point, the movie launched with more paranormal occurrences, which you know, which always had a purpose there, and sometimes they were a bit more difficult to decode or to interpret in some way. But what I believe here was, or what I believe this meant, was his fear, essentially, of being too little to complete a task, to complete the task ahead of him, being too little and too weak to successfully carry out his mission, to successfully walk down his fate, if you want to, you know, take this story and kind of interpret it on real life. Essentially, we all have certain fate, and whether we believe, you know, it's like destined, or that we make our fate ourselves, there is such a concept as fate. You know, you can think about it from the fate perspective. And this man in particular is searching for, or going on a quest to kind of meet his fate in a way, but he always struggles with the fact that he perhaps doesn't say it outright ever in the movie, which I like as well. You know, it's all implied, it's all shown in how he behaves. But it is clear that like he feels inadequate in many in very many ways that you know, he shouldn't feel inadequate about, as he is the hero of the story. And here in this massive ocean that is essentially this small little pond, that he's kind of falling in and so sees stars, everything, he feels like he's little against the cosmos of this pond, which is essentially an ocean of possibilities, as well as the ocean of his fate that he can barely swim around. But he does manage to recover the skull and essentially carries on. The next part of the journey was also very mystical, but there was a strange choice that the movie made that kind of took away from like my enjoyment of these like mystical occurrences. So as he was stumbling around the woods, and he didn't have much to eat, he found some mushrooms. And the mushrooms looked very much like the kind of mushrooms that I remember from movies such as Midsommar, as in hallucinogenic mushrooms, like shrooms that people do. But he eats them, you know, he's hungry. He eats them, sits down, and immediately sees just grass covering his arm, you know, and he sees it like from his POV, from his perspective. But then when the camera cuts to his arms, there's nothing there, and then, you know, he like tries to rub it off, and it's gone. So in that way, the movie essentially, without saying a word, very very well presents us. Listen, these are hallucinogenic mushrooms. All right, he just ate hallucinogenic mushrooms. But in the next scene, he's walking up a mountain, and he witnesses several giants just walking along the mountains, like actual like massive giants that are essentially naked people just walking towards the horizon, which I feel is again some kind of significance. It has a significance in terms of like him feeling like a little boy in a massive world. And now it's not only about his fate, but it's also about the titans in whose footprints he is walking in, essentially, you know, because he's part of this like round table essentially of Arthur, and the king asks him straight at the beginning, you know, like entertain me with some tales from your life, you know, like regale your like heroic quests. And he said, you know, I don't have any. And that is when the Green Knight approaches at the beginning, and that is the reason why he volunteers to fight the Green Knight and play the beheading game. And it's not called the beheading game, but like You know, the Green Knight says, just give me a blow and I will return it in 1 year. And he's like, okay, sure, and beheads him, you know, and goes straight in for the honor, for the glory, for the valor immediately. Because he feels kind of like he doesn't really belong within all these other knights. So this particular scene is possibly supposed to mean that there's all these other knights, all these other titans in his life that he cannot, that he's just a tiny little human compared to. But the issue with the shrooms is, before I just knew that it was like a mystical, like when he was in the pond, it was like a mystical moment, you know, like a paranormal moment, where, you know, the world is kind of like shifting, and his way of thinking is kind of shifting in a way that kind of corresponds to the story. But here, the issue is that it's a little bit more ambiguous, and you could just say that he was just tripping balls on the shrooms, you know? So I felt that took away from that, and I don't think that the mushroom had any other purpose than making this particular scene ambiguous, and it's a beautiful scene, and I don't think it needed to be ambiguous. And hey, Garson's here. Sorry for not reacting to you sooner, but I was kind of on a roll. I wanted to finish my point. Anyway, Garson's The Green Knight review. It had a knight and they were green. Fucking pog. Yeah, well, it is true. It is true that you could do these reviews in a very short manner. I did actually, at one point, I did actually think, let me let me just watch like a couple more movies and make like reviews of like 3 movies in a row on these Fridays, but I don't think I'll be capable of that. I don't think I'll have time for that. But yes, you are right. It is about a knight that was more or less green, you know. But hey, maybe then we wouldn't be able to talk about the many issues that often spark debate. You know, maybe I expanded on your joke a little bit too much, but hey, I'm drinking green tea, so I am kind of on fire right now. Also, welcome back, Garson. I'm glad that you are here on this, the most important of streams, the Friday review stream. But yeah, this is the March of the Giants that I was talking about. A very beautiful scene, and as with the rest of the movie, it's the musical undertones really just work so well. You know, it just makes the atmosphere, and the kind of music that you imagine looking at this, those kind of like more like distant, epic, like medieval. What? It's not medieval, but like. What the fuck is that instrument that's in the churches called? In Czech it's varhany. Let me check it out. Pipe organ. Yeah. So like distant pipe organs. Exactly the kind of music that you would imagine would make this scene perfect. That's what it was, you know? I'm not sure if it was actually pipe organs. I don't particularly remember the music exactly, but it has to know that like everything fit perfectly as you would imagine it should fit. But yeah, as you could see on some of those pictures, and you can kind of see over here to the left of Garwin there to the bottom, he does have a fox that starts following him in the forest, which is kind of cute. I don't mind that, but as foxes can't really be properly trained, it had to be CGI, and I think there was like one too many shots that were directly on the fox, and CGI is CGI, and it just kind of like it wasn't like a particularly awesome CGI, you know. It wasn't like Lion King level of CGI. This was like kind of regular CGI, and it kind of like distracted me a little bit as well. So that's another like small little thing that I didn't particularly appreciate about the movie. The CGI fox, like it did have its purpose, especially towards the end, where it like kind of like trying to stop Garwin from completing the last couple meters to the Green Chapel, as you know, the fox started speaking out of nowhere, which was also pretty cool. and it said like, listen, you're just not ready to complete this quest. You know, like you don't want to die. You're not prepared for it mentally. But he shoos the fox away and runs on. But before he gets there, he gets to this house of this lord, which I kind of briefly talked about in the original story from the 14th century, where like he kind of like undergoes his last what is it, like test, essentially, test of his valor, of his honor, essentially. And the movie shifts away from the original in a fairly like major way, and the only reason I knew that was because I was so confused by what it was exactly supposed to mean that I had to actually like fully research. I had to dedicate like an hour or two to like the research for this movie, and I had to dedicate a large part of that to actually researching what happened in the original, in the 14th century tale, you know. So anyway, in this story, before he gets to, you know, where he's supposed to go, he manages to find his house, and exhausted, he again stumbles in, and he's taken in by this lord and his, you know, old lady, I suppose, and what appears to be his daughter. And the daughter, you know, he stays there a couple days because he apparently made time somehow. So he can stay there a couple days, and the daughter is like trying to seduce him the whole time, and it is like, it seems like some kind of a test, because, you know, the Lord asks him like very like long and very interesting questions about like why he's on this quest, and he asks him like, you know, if you finish this quest, essentially, like what does it mean? Does it mean, you know, like, why are you doing this? And Garwin says, you know, I'm doing this for honor. And the Lord asks, so if you complete this quest, like you will just have honor. That's it. That's your life made. And he's like, yeah, it is. And he doesn't say it as assuredly as I just now interpreted. He's just like, you know, yes. And the Lord is like, interesting. You know, like it's clearly like there's some kind of like, it's a long conversation. I kind of like put it down into like the main points, but it does open up a lot of questions, which is, I think, what any kind of good art should do. Open up questions like that. Have a little bit of a meditation about time, because it made me think about what I want in life, for example, right? And I get a little bit personal here, okay? So I have a couple goals in life, but one of those goals is to become successful as a writer. I want to be able to just, you know, for the books that I publish, I want them to be successful enough for me to be able to be like an established writer. Like whenever I, you know, want to make money, want to kind of express myself, I can write a book, and I will have many followers or many readers that will enjoy these books. And it doesn't have to be books, you know, it can be movies, any kind of media. That's something I know that I want in life. I want my written expression to be somewhat of, you know, like a staple of who I am and something that makes me. But realize, like, thinking about that, I have no idea if I, and I'm trying to, you know, I'm trying to look at it as like but like if I achieved something like that, what next? You know, like the way I kind of simplistically think about it is like, you know, there's always another book, another movie that you can make, another interesting genre that you can explore, and that's what people do, you know. But realistically, you have this quest ahead of you, this kind of idea. And like, will you have the same kind of satisfaction from things when you reach it? Or like, will it really make you whole, or will you just continuously want more things? Because I think about, you know, like this time where I'm like doing part-time agency work, and and just having enough money to like cover all my expenses, but not really making enough money because I need enough time for my work that doesn't pay anything. Like, you know, like, and I have this time when I'm like trying something. I'm like planning to revamp this stream. I'm writing books. I'm writing a book and writing several stories at the same time in order to, you know, publish and get somewhere. And it's very like unsure of whether I'll get somewhere or something. But sometimes I'm thinking, what if I get there? What if I get to the situation that I'm imagining for myself and think, damn, the quest was actually a lot better than actually getting there. And that's something that this movie made me think about. Again, you know, it's not the first time I thought about it, but like the movie kind of made me think existentially about myself, which I think is one of the staples of an excellent movie. You know, that is a way how I'm defining excellence in art, when it makes you think about yourself, your position in society, your existence. That is for me the quintessential part of art and artistry in general, and this movie does that. So, you know, having the movie do that means that it automatically is above average, that it automatically is good art in my opinion. But this particular part of the movie with, like saying that, this particular part of the movie with the Lord and the daughter trying to seduce this dude and everything is still kind of weird a little bit. It's not weird actually, as you know, we've seen a lot of weird movies, but it's kind of like off slightly, especially compared to the original. So here in this movie, like one of the final mornings that Garwin has in that little in that not little this massive house where these people live, the daughter finally comes to his chamber that morning and shows him, you know, this belt that she made. And the significance of the belt is that it's looks exactly like the magical belt that his mother, Garwin's mother, gave to him at the beginning of his quest. And that belt was supposed to protect him. Essentially, if you wear this belt, then this is a little bit of a spoiler actually that you're seeing on screen right now. That if you wear this belt, no strike can hit you. You know, you're basically invulnerable. But he loses it because the highwaymen take it from him. But this woman now suddenly has it. This daughter of this lord suddenly has it, and he's like, you know, where did you get this? Like, did you find this? Like, what the hell? And she's like, no, I made it. You know, I made it. But anyway, so it's a belt. It's a magical belt that protects him. So he wants it. And you know, she kind of like gets on him as he's on the bed, or like gets closer to him as he's on the bed, and like she makes him, you know, tell her like how much he wants it, you know. So he says, I want it, you know, and obviously sexual like subtext and all that. But then, and let me just check the users in chat. Okay, and then he prematurely ejaculates, and to this moment, I am not exactly sure what that was supposed to be. So, as you know, as she's getting closer, like there's like sexual tension ramping up. They don't kiss or anything. They don't actually have sex. He just ejaculates onto her, and she wipes it off with that belt and gives it into his hands. And there's a very graphic shot on, you know, on. That's kind of weird. Fucking hell. You know what on, right? Actually, you don't. It might be two things. On the fucking cum, all right? There's a graphic shot on the cum and the belt that he clutches in his hands. And it's very graphic. It's perhaps the most graphic that I've seen in a movie like that. And I'm like sitting there like thinking, what the fuck is this? And there's just like theories running in my head. Like, is this supposed to like show his like show his humiliation, that he's pathetic or something. Because if that's supposed to show that he's pathetic in a way, because she also says, as she like gets up and gives him the bell, she says, "You're no knight," you know. So it is, because the movie like always kind of trying to paint him as not the actual hero. You know, he has many fears. He's not self-confident. He's unsure about his quest. He's somewhat cowardly in some situations, but it never really tried to paint him as pathetic. And this was not really, I don't know. This wasn't. This just like I just didn't understand it. Okay, I just didn't kind of see it, and the only thing that could kind of work in my head was like that he's like a little pathetic, a little weird. Like that he's not, maybe not weird, but like that he isn't a knight because he doesn't have either chivalry, nor nor is he actually the like cool party guy that like fucks, I guess. There's like kind of like a middle ground. He's unsure of himself. He's immature. Maybe it was supposed to be like immaturity essentially, but still a very like when you make something this graphic, and they did make it graphic without actually showing like nudity or anything. They did make it pretty graphic. Like when you do something like that, like it appears as like an important point of the movie, and it is discussed a lot on the internet as like an important point of the movie. But before this happened, the Lord told Garwin that like anything that he receives in this house, like he wants. He asked the Lord. The Lord essentially said, "If you receive anything in my house, would you please give it to me?" And Garwin agrees. So then, he rushes out. Garwin rushes out, all embarrassed, of course. And as he rushes out, he's met by the Lord, who's hunting. And the Lord is like, "Hey, what's up? Where's the hurry?" And he says, I just need to finish this quest, and he's obviously, frazzled. And the Lord tells him, "Did you forget about our little agreement, which you received in this house, I get." And he approaches Garwin, and they kiss. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, what? Like, what do you mean? Like, how is that connected at all? So they kiss. Garwin is kind of like taken aback a little bit. They do have a full-on kiss, so he doesn't like get out immediately. And I'm thinking like, interesting. So is the movie like trying to like reframe it? Maybe like he abandons the quest to be with the Lord. Maybe he's like secretly gay or something. Thinking about all these things, but like no, he then like gets away from the kiss and is like, "All right, bye bye," and goes to kind of doesn't just go bye bye, but like he's kind of like weirded out, and it just goes on for the rest of this quest. And I was so confused as to what this was. And then I checked out the original, but I was like, no way, a fucking 14th century text talks about a kiss between two men. Like that's the kind of shit that would get you brutally murdered like this, right? Not only does it talk about a kiss between two men, it talks about several kisses between two men, the original. The original goes in this way. So Garwin is in this house, and the daughter is trying to seduce him. And sometimes, like from time to time, he does kind of like not resist and lets himself be kissed by the girl. But every day, after the day is done, essentially, where he was kissed by the girl, he would go out with the Lord and tell him, and the Lord is like, "Well, you received a kiss, now you have to kiss me." And he's kind of like unsure about it, but because he's so chivalrous and has this kind of honor and loyalty, he kisses the Lord as well. And this happened like 2 or 3 times, and then in the final day, like he kisses like right before he's going on the quest again, he kisses the girl 3 times in order to get this belt. And then he doesn't tell the Lord about the belt, but he does tell him about the 3 kisses, and he kisses him 3 times as well at the final day, which, you know, I guess makes more sense, I think, because it is more like this talk of like the chivalry and kind of loyalty and honor this knight has, even against something that would at the time definitely be considered as a very difficult, like very, you know, very big no kind of thing to do, you know, kiss another man. So that's kind of like how I'm imagining it, like how it, like why it worked in that particular like manuscript, because it would say that like to keep your honor and your word, you would have to do something that would be so, you know, and I'm talking like historical context here, obviously, don't take me out of context. Like historically would be so like horrible and disgusting, like kissing another man 3 times, no less, you know, like that's kind of like how I think like the original was, which I guess made sense for the time. But here it doesn't really make sense, because yes, they do kiss once, but Garwin never kissed the daughter. That's the daughter, by the way, there on the image there. Garwin never kisses the girl. So like, how does that make sense? You know? That is kind of weird. What would make sense in this context was if he made the Lord, you know, also come, which would be kind of interesting, I guess. But that didn't happen. They just exchanged a kiss, and he never received a kiss in that house, so it just made little to no sense. So I feel like that they just botched this idea just for an opportunity to show Garwin as more of a pathetic person, or more of an immature person, and show his like struggle with his own identity, essentially, that I, you know, described before as going as far down as like some kind of like absolute immaturity when it comes to like even kind of sexual expression of some kind. But anyway, like the whole idea is just kind of botched in this whole part of the movie, you know? It kind of feels that way. But you know, I'll kind of wrap this up. As the review, sorry, not the review, as the review as well. But as the movie comes to a close, he finally gets to the Green Chapel, and he waits for the Green Knight to wake up from his slumber. He's like in a wall, essentially, you know, a little bit like the pirates in the boat on Pirates of the Caribbean 2 and 3. Anyway, as he wakes up around during Christmas time, Christmas Day, or Boxing Day rather, the day after, the Green Knight's like, well, you came. No pun intended, by the way. You came. And he's like, yeah, well, I'm here. And, you know, he was scared and shaking and everything. And the Green Knight's, are you ready? And he's like, yeah, I guess. He goes down to all fours. The Green Knight takes his axe and goes to swing at him. But, you know, he always flinches. The Green Knight stops and he's like, hey, did I flinch, dude? You know, fucking get some, dude. But he always like keeps flinching, and then he runs away. He isn't able to take it. He finally runs away, gets on his horse, and runs straight into the castle. At that point starts my favorite part of the movie, and something that I don't think I've ever seen before in my entire life. A full concluding 25 minutes without a single word uttered. This is like, you know, 20 to 25 minutes, the final 20 to 25 minutes of a movie, of a 2-hour movie, you know? So nearly a fourth, actually, when you think about it, nearly a fourth. Well, actually, more like a fifth or something, I don't know. So like a huge portion of the movie where not a single word is uttered, and the whole movie comes to a conclusion. There's this whole story of him, you know, coming back and and like it's shown that he possibly has told everyone that his head was actually separated from his body, but he survived. Because there's scenes of like his lover essentially like looking at his neck and like inspecting everything. Then it is shown that he's being chosen as the king's successor. He's being shown as the king, son getting born and all that. And throughout all of this, he has this very kind of saddened and depressed demeanor. It is shown that he kind of lives a life of a lie, a life of cowardice. And it goes on, and there's like scenes of battles and wars, and his first son dies, and then there's his second son, and throughout all of this, he has that little like protection around his waist, that little belt that he received from that embarrassing moment with that girl. And there's his whole life is happening in this 20 minutes, all the way to the battles coming at his own gates and attackers of his town. That's after like 20 minutes comes into like finally battering down his main hall essentially. So like he essentially lost the war and lost the battle, and like his main hall of his main gate city is being broken into, and he's just sitting there alone. His queen escaped along with his last child, and he's just sitting there looking melancholically and depressed. And he just looks at everything, looks at his hands or something, and takes away his belt, and at that moment his head falls down. And it's a very long-winded but beautifully composed series of like his entire life, with very kind of like deep but still like medieval-esque music going in the background, and everything like comes to conclusions, kind of breathtaking in a way. And then after all of that, after all those 20 minutes, he's back in his young self in the Green Chapel, kneeling down in front of the Green Knight. And like the Green Knight is swinging, and he tells him, "Stop, I'm not ready yet." He takes out his protective belt, throws it away, and then upon exchanging a couple more words with the knight, his head is severed, and that's the end of the movie. Incredible stuff, honestly. The conclusion, it's all built on like essentially his last temptation and seeing his fate in like in front of his eyes, essentially reliving his life. What would it be if he actually escaped? Understanding the value of fate, and finally coming to terms with his journey and his quest at the very end. And it is kind of reminiscent of a movie that I've seen so long ago that I don't particularly remember it, just like the basis of it. I don't want to spoil it too much here, obviously, but the movie is called The Last Temptation of Christ. But essentially, so if you know, you know, but I won't talk about it anymore. So the whole thing is, like, he finally comes to terms with his fate at the end after witnessing what is, what would his life be if he had not been, like, how to put it, if he does not accept his fate and get his head beheaded, and he chooses to accept his fate, to accept that he will get beheaded rather than live this life that he envisioned or that he saw in front of him, which is a very interesting, very like in-depth look on like fate and life's journey in general, that really made me think, like, once again, and just I thoroughly enjoyed this entire last part of the movie. But it also made me think, and this is perhaps a question for you guys, if you're still listening. Is it better to, I mean, and I'm not talking like, I'm talking very philosophically, I don't mean like in your life, where do you in this particular situation, because that's kind of like, hard to imagine. But is it better to accept your fate? How did I actually write it? Is death preferable to life based upon cowardice? Or is it just accepting one's fate no matter how bad it seems? Is that the alternative like way of looking at it? Essentially, like, would you rather die than live somewhat of a half life that leads to tragedy? That is the question, you know? Or is it just about him finally seeing that there's no escape from his fate? That the alternative is bad, bravery is overrated? Because that is something that I kind of like came up with as well. I'm thinking like being me in that situation, right? And seeing that my life is, you know, having children and wives and like a wife and a lover and doing all these battles and wars. But yes, my firstborn dies, and yes, I eventually die as my enemies break down my gate in like 30 fucking years, or like 40 or 50 fucking years. I say, still would choose life. Still would choose life. So if you look at it in a very simple way, you know, in a very in this very simple way, like in this exact situation, which I don't think the movie may particularly be talking about. I would of course say, you know, still better to be alive, still better to have some kind of life. It's never preferable to just die, you know. So yes, I would just run away, and I'm like, yeah, I guess I'm a coward, but at least I'm alive. I have these children and stuff, you know. There's something I might, you know, like fucking be mad at myself or be depressed with myself my entire life, but it's still a life worth living. Every life is worth living. So yeah, if it comes to this particular question, I have a very clear answer for myself. But what if it's more about like, you know, just don't think about the death aspect of it, because the Green Knight didn't die either, you know. What if it's more, and we don't know if Garwin actually dies at the end, because his, like, there's axe coming down and a cut to black, you know, so we don't see him actually die. So perhaps the movie is more posing a question of like are you strong enough to accept your fate, or maybe trying to teach us, you know, you need to accept your fate, essentially. Going on a journey that perhaps takes away everything from you, takes but like in more of a metaphorical sense, you know. So if you think about it in real life, you know, you can be working in a I'm gonna put it in a very simplistic terms, right? Imagine you're working in an office, for example, for in an office where you don't particularly enjoy yourself, but you know, it pays the bills, I guess, and like I guess it's okay, and you can live out your days in this office, and like eventually find a wife and get it, and you know, have children and all that, and stay in this office until you die. Just a boring office job, or you consider it boring. You know, not all office jobs are boring. Some people enjoy them, whatever. Or in this case, if you know, want to, for example, paint, and you feel like, you know, there's a way for you to paint more if you leave this job and really try to sell your paintings and go this risky route, and you feel like this is the path for you. You feel like this is what will fulfill you, and therefore this is your fate. Like, does the movie tell us that that is the choice that you should do? You should go with, take the more risky choice that you feel is your fate, rather than cowardly running away from essentially pulling the trigger on your fate, on the rest of your life. I think that is the question that the movie poses, and I think that is the most important thing. The most important thing about the movie, and why this movie is actually great, is because it makes us pose these questions. And that's it about movies in general, you know, about good, excellent movies that I consider art, movies that make us think existentially about ourselves. And this is definitely one of them. And with that, I'd like to conclude the review.